Welcome to Edinburgh Gin Festival, guys. My name is Rich. I work for Sipsmith Gin Distillery down in London. Just show of hands, who's not heard of Sipsmith before today? So a couple of new people. Oh, a lot of people. Awesome. So who has? Show of hands. Okay, it's about 50-50 split. Cool. Come on, guys. Grab a seat. So today, guys, I'm going to do a very brief sort of presentation on the history of London distilling. Gin has actually got quite a dark past, so we'll delve into that. Then I'll introduce you to who we are, Sipsmith, who our founders are, how we started, what we do, and then we're going to do a tasting of the London Dry Gin at the end, and then there should be about 5 or 10 minutes for some questions as well, so I'll open the floor up. So, before we start, does anyone know the origins of gin? It's probably behind me on the screen because it's still nailing it so far. So it comes from Holland, but it was actually, gin itself was born in London as an ancestor from Geneva. Now in the 1600s there's a Dutch scientist that realised that juniper berries had medicinal uses. If you ate enough of them, they could actually cure sort of any pains you had. It's essentially a strong painkiller. I don't know if you've ever tried to eat a juniper berry, but they're really quite spicy, quite intense. 1 or 2 is fine, but trying to eat a bowl full of these things, it's kind of like the cinnamon challenge or the cracker challenge. It's a bit difficult. So this absolute genius realised that if he added these juniper berries into a distilled spirit, it not only made it easy to consume, it's slightly more enjoyable because you got a bit pissed in the process. That was the birth of Geneva. Now Geneva is the Dutch translation of the word juniper, juniper being the botanical in that spirit. Very different from gin. It's actually made from a wash, so it's more like a new make whiskey with juniper berries in it. It tastes completely different. Now, people in Holland actually started drinking this even when they weren't ill and got a bit of a taste for it. And a few distilleries started to produce non-medicinal Geneva. Now this was actually introduced to the Brits in 1620 during the 30 Years' War. This is really high tech, by the way, guys. Now, in the 30 Years' War, are you all familiar with the phrase Dutch courage? Yeah. It stems back to this time. Basically, the Brits and the Dutch were allies fighting against the Spanish. Now, the Brits were getting ready to charge at the enemy, the Dutch beat them to it, just charged off their rocket, straight into the enemy, no fear whatsoever. Their secret? They all had a bottle of Geneva on their belt, were getting absolutely wasted, and then running at the enemy. And that's how the war was won, hence Dutch courage. Now, obviously, we returned home from the war, news of this Geneva spread, we had to get our hands on it, and the Dutch started to send it over to the UK. That's when it first landed on our shores. Now, it becomes gin a little bit later. Towards the end of the 17th century, Prince William of Orange takes the throne in the UK, very much assesses the drinking situation in Britain at that time. We pretty much only drank French wine and French brandy. Now, this was a bit of a problem, seeing as he was at war with the French, so we were funding the enemy. So, he decided to put huge importation taxes on French wine and French brandy, which made it very difficult and very expensive to obtain. But in return, he allowed people to distill their own spirits at home. There were basically just 2 rules. Firstly, when you're producing alcohol, you need a fermentable sugar, primarily starch. You can get that from almost any cereal, whether that's rye, wheat, barley. You can get it from fruit. You can even get it from milk, like Black Cow Vodka in the southwest are actually producing vodka from a milk. Now, there was a surplus of English corn that was actually going to waste after the food industry. So as long as you produced your alcohol from this English corn, it was legal. Secondly, you had to write a notice saying, I wish to distill spirits on my premises, leave that in public display for 10 days. That was it. You were a master distiller. No one actually knows why it was 10 days because there's no appeal process against it. You just had to leave the sign outside for 10 days, and that was it. Apparently, you were qualified to start making booze. So, when we started drinking large volumes of booze, us Brits aren't very good at pronouncing 3-syllable words, so we shortened Geneva down to gin. And we started using other botanicals in there. So instead of this gin, we're now adding citrus, spice, some sweetening agents, and gin was born. Now, this sounds great, being able to distill your own spirits, but actually it led to what was known as the gin craze. So, picture the scene. 1720s London. 1 in 4 structures is producing its own gin. 1 in 4. There are 7 distilleries across London right now. That would be a tiny alleyway back then. 1 in 4 structures. On top of that, every man, woman, and child was drinking 14 imperial gallons per year each. It's about 3 to 4 pints of gin a week per person. Half of you look shocked, half of you say, should have seen me on Saturday night. Now, bear in mind, gin was nothing like it is today. it would still be produced from a wash. We didn't have the column still, so we couldn't produce neutral grain spirit, which is what gin and vodka are both made from today. And people started to cut corners. There wasn't a huge amount of strict regulation on this, other than leaving that sign outside for 10 days, and you were supposed to use English corn. That English corn became a faff. People wanted to get it quicker. They would literally go out into the street, their local tavern, sweep the floor, get any sort of sawdust or scraps of food that might have sugar in it, put that in their sink or their bathtub. They then ferment and distill that to produce their gin. Juniper berries, again, became quite difficult to get your hands on because everyone wanted them. So apparently the nearest alternative to add that beautiful pine spice flavour to your spirit was to add turpentine into it. So 3 to 4 pints of street fermented gunk and turpentine is not going to do your health any favours. And actually, in 1720, the death rate in London had outgrown the birth rates. Effectively, gin was the first drug epidemic to start killing off the population. So, basically something had to be done. The government steps in, it takes them quite some time, and they introduced the first Gin Act in 1736. Nothing changed, you still had to use English corn, you still had to leave the notice outside for 10 days, but now the government did what they do best and tried to make some money from the situation. And they put duty on production, about £1 per gallon, which in today's money is about £1,500. Now if you remember I just said everyone drank 14 gallons per year on average each, it's about £21,000 a head. That's an obscure amount of money. The idea was to make this so expensive that it just put people off distilling. Didn't work. It actually went the opposite way. People rebelled, there were riots in the streets. Production actually increased for the next 6 years because we were so obsessed with gin in Britain. Pretty much like today. The Act was repealed in 1742, and over the next 9 years the government introduced numerous different acts, which I'm not going to go through because none of them worked, so it's not even worth mentioning them. But we get to 1751 and everything changes. Now in 1751, the government introduced the £50 Act. You now had to pay £50 for your licence, you couldn't just leave a sign outside. It's about £75,000. On top of that, they cracked down on the production materials you were using. So if you were caught using gunk from the street or adding turpentine or whatever else, you'd get in a serious amount of trouble. And thirdly, you had to produce a batch size of at least 1,800 litres. So unless you had a very elaborate sink or a strange looking bathtub that could fit that volume of liquid in it, you needed a still. Now, at the same time of this act coming out, these two very famous drawings were produced by William Hogarth, an artist who lives in Chiswick, literally 100 metres down the road from where our distillery is now, which is quite a nice little town. Now, the brewing industry was struggling. No one was buying beer. Firstly, because it was more expensive than producing your own gin, and secondly, it was only about 4 or 5% ABV. Why would you bother if you could make anything from 40 to 50%? It just seemed like nonsense. So they actually commissioned William Hogarth to draw these two pictures. And the one on the left here is Gin Lane, probably the more famous of the two, but they're meant to go together. This picture here is Beer Street. So, you all thought you were going to come out on a Saturday night to Juniper Festival and have an enjoyable time. The tone is about to get extremely morbid when I describe what's in these pictures. If we focus on Gin Lane first, in the middle there, that woman is Mother's Ruin, the nickname gin had at this time. She is the human embodification of gin during 1751. She's got a very scabby looking leg. Does anyone know what that is? What's caused that? She's actually been selling her body so that she can buy more gin and has picked up a few diseases along the way. It's actually syphilis. I told you, the tool was coming. On top of that, she is so drunk, she's dropped her child down the stairs. That's not supposed to be funny. Scottish people are weird. It doesn't, no, actually I'm not going to make that joke. So, the child actually falls, the story goes, she dies, she takes the clothes from the child, sells them to the pawnbroker so she can get her next gin fix. Now this sounds a little bit extreme as a propaganda piece, but there's actually a woman called Judith IV at this time that actually received her child back from the workshops in fresh clothes, strangled her own child to death, took the clothes so she could get more gin. On top of that, this guy doesn't look like he's in a very good place. He's either dead or completely wasted. In the background, there's a pile of bodies outside the morgue because the death toll is so high there's not enough room for all of the corpses. This sort of cluster of people on the right-hand side here, they're all fighting over each other and kind of hitting each other with stools. That is outside the gin palace where they can all get their gin. And to the left, it's slightly cut off, but you might see the guy on the ledge here is actually eating his own leg. Because apparently that's what you do if you drink enough gin. And behind him there, you've got the pawnbroker where everyone is selling their belongings. There's actually a woman selling all of her pots and pans. She's the mother of a large family. She's giving up all of that equipment so she can buy more gin. There is also a carpenter selling all the tools of his trade, giving up his livelihood to get his gin fix. What a horrible place. I'm going to stop drinking gin because Beer Street is amazing. I mean, look at these guys. They've got huge bellies because ale is full of vitamins and it's nutritional. Everyone's wearing nice clothes, no one's dead or wasted, they're all happy. The pawnbroker's sign is now slanted, he's out of business, no one needs to sell their belongings. In the background, the morgue has disappeared, there's now a tavern selling nutritional ale to the masses. To the top left, an artist, because when you drink beer, you are intelligent and cultured. I certainly know where I would rather live, Beer Street. So, slight exaggeration, but really depicts how desperate times have got in London at this time. Now, how did we get from, I mean, when this came out, gin's reputation hits rock bottom. No one wants to be seen drinking it. You'd pretty much hide away in an alleyway. It was seen as a horrendous drug. This is when the Old Tom gin was born. It's a sweeter style of gin. Back then, it was actually being produced illegally using low quality ingredients still, and they would add a lot of sugar to mask the poor taste. That's why it's sweeter in style. Old Tom gin today, we don't produce one, but there are numerous good ones in the market. It's sweeter today, just to stay true to its history, but there's no turpentine in it, so don't worry, you can definitely drink it safely. Now, in my mind, there are three brands responsible for sort of the gin, or the gin-naissance that we're witnessing today, this gin renaissance where it's come back. The first brand, because vodka, in the 1950s overtook gin. I mean, gin was used in the Navy during the 1800s, 1900s, during Prohibition in America. American bartenders came over to the UK and really kickstarted our cocktail scene here, so gin became slightly popular again. But it was replaced in the 1950s by vodka. Now, the first brand that sort of brought gin back into the spotlight a little bit came out in 1987. Any ideas? Yeah, Bombay Sapphire. So it came in that light blue bottle. Until then, gin was in a clear glass bottle or a green glass bottle. Premium gin, vapor infused. Now, it didn't revolutionize the industry, but certainly got people buying a gin instead of a vodka. The next brand that came out was in 2001. From Scotland. Hendrick's, yeah. So that black apothecary style bottle using cucumber and rose petals as their two main botanicals, bartenders started garnishing the gin and tonic with a cucumber wedge. I mean, that was completely unheard of until we used a lemon or a lime, and this completely changed everything and actually changed the way that we approach the gin and tonic. But actually, both of these brands are produced on a huge, huge scale. Now, the third brand responsible started in 2009 in Hammersmith. No, Gordon's, of course. So, in 2009, we actually were the first ever micro distillery in the UK, so essentially the first craft gin, if that's what we want to call it. I'll tell you a little bit about us and how we actually managed to do that, because there's a reason why we couldn't, or why we were the first. So, we ignore this elaborate looking gentleman for the time being. I will get to him in a minute. He needs at least 5 minutes on his own to talk. These two here are our two founders. In the centre there, at the back, you've got Sam Galsworthy. Bottom right is Fairfax Hall. That is their real name. So Fairfax Hall sounds like an elaborate country club or something, I don't know. But the two of them are actually from Cornwall, were best friends all the way through school, and actually lost touch, went their separate ways, but both ended up working in the drinks industry. Sam in the centre there worked for Fuller's Brewery in London, and Fairfax worked for a very niche drinks company. If you've not heard of it, please don't be embarrassed. It's called Diageo. Quite niche. And the two of them actually were both out in America at the same time with their respective jobs. So Sam was responsible for taking London Pride, Fuller's flagship beer, and introducing it into the American beer market about 18 years ago. If you think back 18 years, craft brewing wasn't really a big thing over here, but in America it was really kicking off. Everyone was getting bored of these mass-produced beers. Everyone wanted to go and get this beer that's being done by hand, better quality ingredients, small batch, producing something of a much higher quality. Now, whilst they were both out there, they actually crossed paths at a drinks event, rekindled their friendship, and over the next 2 years visited as many of these microbreweries as they could and thought to themselves, why the hell is this not happening in the UK? But more importantly, why is no one doing it with spirits in the UK? To cut a long story short, the two of them both quit their jobs on the same day, both moved back to the UK, sold their houses, moved their families into rented apartments so they could show investors they were deadly serious about starting a distillery, producing spirits the same way these craft brewers are making beer. So by hand, better quality ingredients, small batch, producing something of a higher quality. Now there were three things they needed. Firstly, a master distiller, because neither of them knew how to distill at the beginning. They're both great businessmen, but if you put them in front of a still, they wouldn't really know what to do. We also needed a location. If you're going to set up a distillery, you need a distillery. And thirdly, we needed a license. So, master distiller, that is where this gentleman comes in. His name is Jared Brown. Has anyone seen him before, or had the pleasure of meeting him perhaps? Okay, how about I describe Jared? He is the most elaborate human being I have ever met, probably ever will meet in my entire life. He's from upstate New York. He's been distilling from the age of 10. I mean, quite literally, he took cider from his parents' fridge, stuck it in the snow each night so he froze off the water content, draining the alcohol and then sticking that back in the snow again. So he freeze distilled all the water off to bring it up to about 40% ABV, brandy. Now I imagine lunchtime in that school playground was interesting. Everyone completely wasted on this dodgy moonshine brandy stuff. Anyway, over the years he has become a drinks historian. He travels the world with his wife Anastasia Miller under the name Mixellany. They've got about 45,000 followers on Twitter. They've judged some of the leading competitions, cocktail competitions in the world, Bacardi Legacy, Diageo World Class, Beefeater World Finals. And basically in 2001, Sam and Fairfax are in London, start making noise about opening up this first ever small batch distillery. They need a distiller. Jared is working for a Swedish distillery and brings a vodka out called Heavy Water, which wins the best white spirit in the world at the San Francisco Awards. Important to note, it's the same year Hendrix came out, so actually beat Hendrix as a small batch vodka. It's really quite impressive. So he's in high demand. Lots of distilleries want him to come and be their master distiller. They're introduced to Sam and Fairfax, and because of how unique their idea was to be the first doing this on such a small scale in the UK, we chose to work with Sam and Fairfax instead of anyone else. So that's when our sort of pair of friends becomes the three amigos. Now, this is actually a picture from our original distillery in Hammersmith. We had one still, that is Prudence in the background. She's a 300 litre Alembic pot still. Now, before we got that, we obviously had to get a license. So we're talking to the Christian Karl family in Germany who hand built these stills. They'd already started building Prudence because we were pretty confident we could get a license. Wrong. We phoned up HMRC in 2006 and said, plans in place to get a 300 litre pot still. We're going to make vodka and gin in a little shed in Hammersmith. Can we have a license, please? We waited 6 months, heard absolutely nothing. Everything was on the line, jobs were quit, houses were sold. Eventually we get a phone call one day out of the blue from HMRC saying, gentlemen, we will not be granting you a distilling license. Right, bit of a problem. Why? Firstly, remember I said, well actually no, firstly, so HMRC actually hadn't granted a distilling license in London since Beefeater. Beefeater opened in the 1820s. It's been almost 200 years since they granted the distilling license. There was no one alive in that office that knew how to give us one. Secondly, they said, you're planning to use a 300 litre pot still, is this correct? And we said, yeah, small batch, handcrafted. And we were like, are you just making this for your friends and family? Or I just didn't understand the concept. But thirdly, that £50 Act that came into place in 1751, where you had to produce at least 1,800 litres, 255 years later, no one had changed that. That is why there were no small batch distilleries. So, bit of a problem. We didn't stop. Sam and Fairfax actually came up to Scotland, where they used to hand out licenses to everyone in here. You guys are having a great time with your whiskey. And we got a lot of advice from the Scottish whisky distilleries. We reapplied and we actually battled with the government for 2 years. Craft brewing at this point, if you think back to 2006, 2007, was huge. You had the likes of Brewdog, Innocent Gun, Camden, Meantime, all blowing up across the UK. But you couldn't distill on a small scale. How wrong is that? So after 2 years, Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister at the time, reviewed that £50 Act, removed the 1,800 litre limit, and granted us the first ever micro distillery licence as a result, sort of opening the floodgates for all these other brands to be able to operate on a small scale. So ladies and gentlemen, Gordon Brown was actually quite good for something. So, we opened our doors in 2009, we started producing a vodka and a gin. We're going to bring around some tasters of the London Dry Gin just now, guys. Now, London Dry Gin does not have to be made in London. It's just a style. So to call something gin, it has to be 37.5% ABV and have juniper in it. And from there you have your different styles of gin. London Dry Gin has to be juniper led. Once it's distilled, you cannot add any flavours post-distillation, and you're allowed a sugar content of up to 0.05 grams per litre, so tiny, tiny amount. We do not add any sugar whatsoever to our gin. We've got slightly sweeter botanicals to balance out the sharper ones. Now, the whole point of Sipsniff, our motto is where old meets new, and the two hit it off quite spectacularly. We're making very traditional style spirits, but doing it in a modern way by hand on these copper pot stills. So, we use 10 botanicals. The 10 botanicals that we use in this London Dry Gin, you will find in pretty much every other London Dry Gin. We're not trying to be out there and different by using mango, raspberry, strawberry, horseradish, or something really niche. The 10 that we use are juniper berries, coriander seed, dried lemon peel, and dried orange peel. So that the juniper adds the pine. The coriander seed actually adds most of the citrus flavour. The dried lemon peel and orange peel add mostly to aroma, but a bit more to flavour. Then for spice and warmth, we add cinnamon and cassia bark. To add a little bit of sweetness, we add almond and licorice. And then the last two botanicals are orris root and angelica root, which are plant roots. They're sort of binding agents. They pull all the flavours together in the gin and really pronounce the aroma. We put the 10 of those into a wheat-based spirit. We leave that to macerate for 15 hours overnight, so all of the oils go into that spirit. Then we turn our still on, just boiling the alcohol content, not the water content, running through the copper still, removing those impurities. When it comes off the still, it'll be about 82% ABV. We then cut that down to 41.6, and that's how we make the gin. Now, the one most important part, or the two things I'd love you to take away, is the fact that we were the first micro distillery and got that law changed. But secondly, we make a one-shot gin. There are two ways to make a gin: one shot or two shot. One shot means we add enough botanicals into the still to make one batch. So what comes off, all we add to it is water, and that's it. So every drop of alcohol in that bottle has gone through the copper pot still and had the impurities removed. Two-shot gin, you can add anywhere up to 500 or 1,000 times the amount of botanicals you need for one batch, ram that into the still, so what comes off is effectively a concentrate with far more flavour and aroma. What a distillery will then do is collect that from their still, add Nutrigrain spirit to it to dilute that flavour down, but also increase the volume, then add water. Does that make sense? So that Nutrigrain spirit, if this was a two-shot gin, about that much of the bottle would have gone through the copper pot still, had the impurities removed. That much would be Nutrigrain spirit, which is going to give a bit of a burn. It's not very smooth. The rest is water. So the way to think about it is one shot is like freshly squeezed orange juice. It's the real deal. It's very expensive, takes a long time, but it tastes and smells amazing. Two-shot is essentially like creating the cordial that you then add water to or stretch it further. It still tastes like orange juice, but it's not quite the same thing. There are only 1% of the UK gin distilleries using one shot like us. The only big one is Tanqueray. The difference between us and Tanqueray, they make in a day, takes us a whole year. So still a lot smaller than the big guys. So, when you smell this, guys, you should have juniper at the front, classic to London dry gin style. You should get a little bit of spice coming through from the cinnamon, it's very subtle. You should get this huge citrus backbone, it's very lemony, a little bit of sort of orange marmalade. When you taste this, you should get the same thing. Juniper, spice, slight bit of nuttiness, and then a big citrus finish. But most importantly, it should be warm on the chest, and it shouldn't burn the back of your throat. Sign of a good alcohol, it's had all the impurities removed, warm. Sign of a bad alcohol, it's maybe got some lower quality alcohols in there, or hasn't had the impurities removed, will burn. So that leaves me to finish with the name before I open up for a quick round of questions. Sipsmith. Now, we started in Hammersmith, we're now in Chiswick because we had to move, we have 4 stills. We're absolutely obsessed with this idea of handcrafting something and the art form of that. And traditionally, if you were handcrafting something, you were a smith. Blacksmith, silversmith, the list goes on. Your art form is what goes before smith. That's where sip comes in. We're crafting things that you can sit and eat because of all that copper contact, taking our time, not rushing it and mass producing it to make sure you can drink it and eat. So guys, that's pretty much been the presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it.